Hello and welcome to yet another opposition preview on the Last Word on Spurs. Big night for Tottenham Hotspur. Champions League. Will Spurs progress to the knockout stages? Of course, big game that's standing in Spurs' way. Olympique Marseille this evening. Huge game for the football club. I'd like to be joined by a French freelance journalist. We've got George Boxall on Last Word on Spurs. George, how are you firstly?
Yeah, not too bad. It's a really exciting game this evening. I'm really looking forward to it. There's just so much at stake, and it's gonna be an exciting evening, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely, really is. Like I say, it's a big game for Tottenham Hotspur in general. Just keen to get to know your thoughts, George, in terms of the game itself, what you're expecting. Give us an idea of what Marseille's form has been like throughout the season so far, if you wouldn't mind.
So Marseille this season have been very up and down, to say the least. In the Champions League, it's been better than in previous years. Winning twice against Sporting Lisbon, which is like the first time Marseille have won in the consecutive games in the Champions League since like 2010. In Ligue 1, it was a great start under Igor Tudor after the chaos in the summer. There was a lot of wins at the start of the season, and then it just sort of fallen off a bit now with losses against the Ajaccio, Lens, and obviously PSG in the Classico about 2 weeks ago. So there's very much a feeling of which OM team will turn up on the night, and especially in a Champions League game like this, where the atmosphere will be right behind the team. You're at the Velodrome. You've got Marseille fans are notoriously known for making almost a cauldron-like atmosphere, and it's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be one that will be hard to predict, especially in terms of Marseille's performance tonight.
Yep, that's interesting stuff. I mean, again, like I say, we talk about that atmosphere and how Spurs are going to have to try and overcome that, of course, without Antonio Conte on that touchline for Tottenham. Just to give us an idea and a flavour of what, again, you've kind of touched upon their Marseille season's been like. What's the confidence like going into this one from your end, George? Do you think they go into this game full of optimism? Because I think as things stand, correct me if I'm wrong, at the worst, Marseille can still secure Europa League football, right? Potentially?
Yeah, potentially. In terms of Marseille, it's almost like it's a do or die game, but they've almost got nothing to lose. They can go from being bottom in the group to being top of the group if they win tonight and results go their way. There's a lot of in terms of how the squad's feeling. In terms of their Ligue 1 performances recently, I think the squad is lacking a lot of confidence. They've had a lot of possession in their recent games in Ligue 1, but they haven't found the back of the net on a lot of occasions. But this is the Champions League, and I feel like they'll be pretty confident after the 2 wins against Sporting. It was obviously a disappointment against Frankfurt a week ago. But yeah, there'll be a cautious sense of optimism, but they know they really need to step up tonight.
And will it feel like that? I mean, Spurs have described it, Conte's described it, and so has Hugo Lloris as being like a final. Do you think it will feel like that for Marseille in terms of the crowd and how they'll approach this game? What's your feelings on that in terms of how that atmosphere will affect tonight?
Absolutely. Yeah. Igor Tudor has said the exact same thing. He said it after the Frankfurt game. As soon as the Frankfurt game finished, he said, we've lost here, but against Marseille, against Tottenham even, it will be like a final, and it is essentially a final for Marseille. They were the outsiders coming into this group, really against the other, against Tottenham and against Sporting in the group and against Frankfurt. They really felt like the outsiders, especially with what happened over the summer in terms of the managerial change and the period of transition that they're going under. It really is a final for them. And considering, Marseille haven't got through the group stages in, since 2011, I believe, and they've had a really poor record in Champions League since then. So I think fans, and especially the team, and especially Igor Tudor, will be thinking this is almost almost an opportunity for the side to do something which they haven't really done in that much this decade at all.
I mean, there's quite a few Arsenal players that are in that squad, George, ahead of this one. Give us an idea of the players that you feel Spurs are going to have to watch out for in this, obviously, reverse fixture. Because to be fair, I mean, I can't help but allude to on last one Spurs. Spurs were very, very lucky to come away with the 3 points against Marseille in the reverse fixture at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. You do feel, had that sending off not happened, that game was almost petering maybe to a draw. And Marseille were on top in large periods, so who knows where that game could have ended up. So the players that you feel could really have an impact on tonight and drive Marseille on in this competition potentially?
For me, the biggest threat for Marseille is the wing back Jonathan Klaus. The Marseille's system means that, you know, they play this 3-4-3 where they have a reliance on Jonathan Klaus and obviously the ex-Arsenal man Nuno Tavares. Their impact on the way that Marseille plays is quite great because they offer width, and especially with Klaus, his early crossing ability is something that is really, really dangerous. He'll cross from literally anywhere on that right-hand side. And, you know, if someone's in the box or if the right runs are being made from Sanchez or Guendouzi, for example, and, you know, I touched on Guendouzi, and Guendouzi will probably be playing slightly higher up than in the game he did in the reverse fixture. And especially with Guendouzi, he's quite a different player from what he was when he was at Arsenal. There's a lot more maturity about his game now. He shows a lot more leadership on the pitch without letting it boil over, without letting it get to him like he did in the past. And it is those ex-Arsenal players, unfortunately, that are the most dangerous. And you've obviously got Eric Bailly coming back into the team. He will be a big part of that OM defense that's been shaky without him, to be honest. And obviously, the main man up front, Alexis Sanchez, who does have that quality. He hasn't quite shown it to the full extent yet at Marseille, but he does have that quality. If the ball comes to him in the box, he will, you know, he's got that deadly finishing touch.
Certainly one for Spurs to keep an eye on, of course. Sanchez making that point in his pre-match press conference. He always loves to score against Spurs. Although I must have known he only did it twice during his time at Arsenal, but again, a player that again seems to have already built into that Arsenal Spurs hatred to some degree in terms of that tribalism rivalry that I love scoring against Spurs. George, I want to get your thoughts actually. I'm keen to always know this from opposition fans of what you've made of Spurs, maybe from the outside looking in, and maybe in the previous game. I mean, what do you make of Antonio Conte's Tottenham? There's been suggestions that we're not the most easiest side to watch on the eye. We haven't really clicked. We haven't really got going. I mean, maybe thoughts on what you thought of the reverse fixture going into this one and what you're anticipating from Antonio Conte's Tottenham tonight, who I did say at the start of this, of course, is Conte-less on the touchline. He won't be there. From what I understand, he will be on the coach waiting for the players to come back on either victorious or despondent. Thoughts on Spurs overall this season, George?
Spurs have been. There's a level of. I think you're right in the Spurs have not been the easiest to watch, especially in the Premier League, and I feel like you guys have really struggled with the overload of games that have been happening in the build up to the World Cup. You know, playing Champions League, back into the Premier League, back into the Champions League again, and especially during the games against Newcastle. There seems to be a level of I wouldn't say fatigue, but there's a level of almost weariness, not only in terms of physical, but almost weariness with the style. And I've heard a few grumblings from some Spurs fans already. Yeah. Some of it is justified in terms of the style of play, but I think you guys still have a really strong squad, and I think you're the team that are most likely to win tonight. Probably. it's just such a hard, for me, it's such a hard one to predict. And in the last game, Marseille really took it to Spurs in the second half, despite that red card. And I think you'll see more of the same tonight.
It's interesting. Like I say, I think you do kind of summarise there how many Spurs fans are feeling. I think, again, this is the thing with Conte, where we have got still one of the elite coaches in the world. And then you do feel with Conte that he almost uses that to his advantage, where he knows that maybe arguably Spurs wherever they go next in terms of a manager, it's only going to be a level down, you'd argue. And I think that's why he feels he can maybe make the changes that he does in such real drive, I would say, with Conte. You know, he's very firm, very stubborn with his choices, for right or for wrong, his selection. So I think it'll be interesting again to see tonight how he obviously goes into this one. Spurs have got a massive game against Liverpool, of course, at the weekend. A game which obviously Spurs win that. There's a massive goal between Tottenham and Liverpool. So I think it's 13 points, 10 to 13 points. So that's a massive game. This is obviously a huge game. It does feel for Tottenham like a final. I think, again, it's about how they mentally deal with the game without Conte being there. Do you think that changes a huge amount, George, from the outside looking in, Conte not being on that touchline for the character that he is?
I think so. Yeah, definitely. And especially when you're going up against another, sort of feisty character in Igor Tudor, who is known for being very almost ferocious on that touchline, very, very, he's very interactive with the crowd, very interactive with the players. And at times with him, it does boil over to the extent that he has had arguments with players, or that he has had disagreements. Even in pre-season, they were having crisis talks before the season ever started. So you're going up against this guy who is almost of the same level. Yeah. And I think that does sort of convert itself onto the pitch in a way.
Okay. Well, George, it's been great talking to you. Finally, we've got to ask you, it is customary on Last Word on Spurs. We have to always get a prediction for the opposition view. I know you said you couldn't really call it. If you had to stick your neck out, what would you go for, George?
Oh, see, I was planning to say it would be a draw, but now I'm going to say Marseille will nick it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you're going to go for what? Are you going for a 2-1 or 1-0?
It will be a 2-1.
Okay. Brilliant, George. Thank you so much. Just to summarise a little more. George, thank you so much for coming on Last Word on Spurs. It's been a real pleasure. Where can everybody find the work you provide on the French football basis? Where can everybody find what you do? You can find me on Get French Football News. That's where I do everything. I'm there all the time doing interviews, doing articles every day on the French news, Ligue 1, Ligue 2, the French national team in the build-up to the World Cup. That's where I'll be. Okay, and look, so we're lucky, George. We have caught you, I think, on a day off. So thank you so much for your time. Absolutely. Really do appreciate it. And again, George, maybe we speak again, depending on who Spurs come up against in the latter stages of this competition, or I can't say the other competitions for the sake of we have to believe so we can get through. So, George, thank you so much for your time. Massively appreciate it. I'm sure everybody knows how you can follow George at George Boxall 2022 on Twitter and across the socials, George, right? Thanks for having me. Thank you. Pleasure, no problem at all. Guys, big game tonight. We are back live with you for post-match reaction on Last Word on Spurs from 10:15. Do not miss it. It will either be a party or it will be therapy. As always, please keep safe, keep well. Come on, you Spurs.